So both Rita and Harper mentioned trans solidarity protests in the US, and as one of Rosa's resident angry trans people, I'm here to tell you why. But first of all, I'd like to actually just give a bit of background context to the situation for trans people in the US. Forewarning, it's bleak. So the US, as Rita said, is like the belly of the beast of capitalism, and it's a difficult place to live for everyone. But it goes doubly and triply so for people, members of the LGBT community, but particularly members of the trans community. And that reflects itself in all kinds of horrific statistics that I give you now. So trans people have very high rates of unemployment, and part of that is that we can't get jobs because people won't hire us because we're trans. And that leads to all sorts of economic issues and stuff like that, which leads to issues with homelessness and other things. Rates of addiction and alcoholism, that kind of stuff, are very prevalent in the trans community and the LGBT community as a whole. So some of the more shocking statistics are that 40% of all homeless youth in America are LGBT, and 60% of those are trans. America is a very big place, that's a lot of people. And the other statistics go on to be continually gruesome. If the average American has a 1 in 196,000 chance of being murdered, a trans woman of colour in America has a 1 in 12 chance. It's hard to contemplate the horrific nature of these things, and it really does tie in extremely well. It ties in a lot with racism, with sexism, and all these other kind of things. And accessing services or being able to try and escape from these kind of poverty situations is made much more difficult by being trans as well. And there's a famous case of 2 years ago, a woman froze to death on the steps of a Salvation Army shelter, and they wouldn't let her in because she was trans. And the Salvation Army although it is a charity for the homeless, it is also a Christian fundamentalist organisation. As are the vast majority of charity organisations, which is an ongoing and current and constant problem for LGBT people, that you have a complete failure of the state to provide services for people who are in the most vulnerable situations. It's then left up to private charities, who most often have fundamentalist religious beliefs that they use in horrific ways, and people suffer because of that. And that's just a bit of a general picture of how lovely things are. So then that brings me kind of to the legal rights situation. And in the last few years in the States, there was a bit of a push forward. In 2016, they achieved marriage equality. And after decades of campaigning by various civil rights groups, by various LGBT movements, and things like that, as well as a decades-long movement started by the murder of Matthew Shepard in the 90s, around the gay panic defence case, which is gay panic and now more commonly known as trans panic, which is a legal argument that's used in the States, and it's legal in many places, including here, which means that if you find out that someone's gay, you can be so infuriated and blinded with rage that you find this information out, or it's more commonly now used by trans people, that it's a legal defence for your reason for murdering them. It's legal in the majority of US states to use this argument in court. Thankfully, it doesn't usually get any headway. And then a few years ago in North Carolina, there was a very famous bathroom bill, which was seeking to show that which sought to make sure that you had to use the bathroom that you were assigned at birth, according to what you had in your birth cert and what was assigned at birth. It was known as HB2, the bathroom bill. And the North Carolina received such massive backlash and condemnation, and protests and solidarity movements from around America, but also around the world, that they actually repealed the law just a year later. But the genie was out of the bottle, so to speak, and within 2017, 10 different states all tried to legislate their own bathroom bills, and in 2018 so far, 21 different laws have been put forward in 10 different states. And And then that brings us to a bit closer to the current crisis, the current attack on trans rights, which is one of the most deep-seated, deep-rooted and widespread attacks on trans rights that's ever taken place on a national scale. And I'm going to read the full thing now out of you. But this is it was leaked by the Department of Health and Human Services. This is a memo about proposed legislation around a definition of gender. So it proposes that gender be defined as an immutable biological condition determined by a person's sex organs at birth. The proposal would define sex as either male or female, and any dispute about one's sex would have to be clarified through genetic testing. And just to clarify a bit further, that means that this would be defining gender as biological and established at birth. And what this essentially means is that it's a legal writing of trans people out of existence. It's basically saying that, like, when you are born, the biological sex that you were born with is permanent, it goes on for the rest of your life, and that you cannot change that, and that you can test for it somehow, which is nonsense, completely scientifically inaccurate. And it also ignores the existence of intersex people, who are people who are not born with traditionally male or female sex characteristics. And like the widespread nature of this like devastating attack, if it should come to be, it's most likely just being used as it was probably intentionally leaked to try and whip up Trump's right-wing support base for the midterm elections that Harper was referencing. But if this does come into being, trans people will cease to exist in every shape, in every sense of the word, in the eyes of the law, which means that we have no access to legal protections, which means that we're not able to get married, which means that we're not able to access services, which means that we wouldn't be able to inherit things, we wouldn't be able to pass things on to our spouses, to our children, we wouldn't be able to adopt. It's complete and utter writing out of the law and a massive attack on the rights of trans people, and it's one of the most it's hard to emphasise how serious this is. It's a gutting attack on the trans community. If it comes to be, it's so far it's only an intention, like so much of Trump's vile right-wing propaganda. And interesting, and it will exclude us from all kinds of things like Title IX law. Title IX law is interesting because it's very commonly used by feminist people in rape cases. And things like that, because it says that it goes back to the civil rights era and was run during that time, so that no one is able to be excluded from education based on their sex. And so it's used quite commonly in cases of women shouldn't be excluded from education because they're getting sexually harassed, but it's also a vital piece of legislation for trans people. And so I've kind of outlined the horrific attack that's coming towards the trans community, and just to say that like this is not based on any kind of medical science whatsoever. 1,600 scientists have signed a letter against it, and saying that it's completely not based on science and it breaches all grounds of ethics, morality, and basic scientific rigor. 700 of whom are biologists and 100 of whom are geneticists, including 9 Nobel Prize winners. Because there's a lot of misunderstanding about basic biology and education, especially in Ireland where we have no sex education, but these things are not based on the fact. So that's kind of a grim picture that I've painted for you all. But in the face of all this, there's been a growing movement for trans rights, and the trans solidarity movement at the very latest facet of that. We've had especially in the last number of years, actually just like the last 5 years, there's been a huge upsurge in people protesting and getting active in trans activism in the trans community, and a huge increase in awareness as well, especially with like public figures like Chelsea Manning and, not to be mentioned, Caitlyn Jenner, who actually, in wake of this most recent attack, has finally withdrawn their support from Donald Trump. But you've seen militant radical activism, not just in the US actually, but on a global scale, and it's something that like when we're talking specifically about the US, but the struggle for these rights and the struggle that the trans community goes through is on an international scale. There's figures showing that 1 in 2 trans people try to attempt to commit suicide during their lifetime, and that 70% of all trans people have self-harmed at some stage. and while that is true in the States, it's actually a global figure, but that's proven by statistics given in the UK, given in France, given in numerous countries. And in response to this, we've had the emergence of trans pride movements, of movements of solidarity between the rest of the LGBT community, between the feminist community, our natural allies, women, and people in the trans community. And I'm now going to just completely shift away from America altogether. I'm going to start talking about Russia very quickly, and you'll understand why by the time I finish. Because Russia is a far more difficult place to be LGBT than America is. It's an extremely authoritarian regime where protest is illegal in basically all forms. You have to apply to have protests, and they can only have one person at them, and the government always says no. And they have an extremely brutal approach. It was very famous there in the news there about concentration camps for gay people in Chechnya, which are actually detention centres used for any political enemy of the establishment. But the case I'm going to reference is there's in 2013 Russia brought in what was known as the gay propaganda law, which meant that it was illegal to propagate being gay in public. And what this essentially meant and was used as is that you couldn't be LGBT in public because you would pervert children. And this law has been in place for many years now, since 2013, you can count. And this has been used to ban pride marches, which when they do take place are attacked by the police and fascists, and the people who are on them are arrested. And very recently this year, a 16-year-old boy was the first minor to be charged with the supposed law that was brought to supposedly to protect children. And his name was Maxim Neverov, and he was found guilty and charged 50,000 rubles. Which is the fine. And the reason he specifically was actually targeted was because he was an LGBT activist, and he had applied 12 separate times to his local city council to have a protest called The Gays of Putin, which is fair play to him for his spirit. But he's been involved in numerous different protests and LGBT activism, and which is why he specifically was targeted as a young LGBT person. And in response to this, there was an international campaign of solidarity launched, and there was protest movements in Russia and solidarity actions. And he recently won his appeal, and he is the first person since the law was brought in to have won against that law. And this is it. Like I actually cried when I found this out. I was so happy, and it's just such brilliant news. A victory in Russia against the most impossible odds. And the reason I mention it when we're talking about the US is because things look very bleak and dark with Trump and the Republicans and America. But it's a worthwhile lesson that's worth noting, and we've seen it here in our own struggles, that when you do fight, you can win, and the fact that victory is possible in such severe, austere conditions should be a clear signal for hope, and a clear signal for the rest of us to get off our asses and do something when we have nowhere near the level of difficulty, and it's so much easier for us. And we can really be confident that when you actually go out there and fight for what's right and fight for what is needed, that you can bring about actual and real change and help to change people's minds. And I know I've gone way over time, sorry Miriam. And I'll just end at that.
Okay.